It's been a little while.
It's been a little while. Had a break.
Man, that was a pound.
So, good evening, everybody. This is the first Finance Committee of 2021. Happy New Year.
Woo! Woo!
We have a lot on the docket this evening, so we'll go ahead and get started. Temporary Resolution 1-21 is coming through Finance. This is a resolution to appropriate for the VAWA Fund. And this is to allow for an amendment, as the original application did not include workers' compensation funds. Mr. Olem, would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Chairman Miller Downhour. Yeah, this is just because of that change and the fact that we're putting the workers' comp expenses within the individualized budgets. We just need to move that money over so that we can do that in the VAWA grant money. So.
Okay. And I have one reading, and Mrs. Bobbitt, I have you as my second.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on that resolution? Okay. Moving on to temporary resolution 2-21. This is a resolution authorizing the Law Director's Office to apply for the Violence Against Women Act grant. This is an annual piece, and it will allow us to apply for this grant. Mr. Olem, do you want to communicate any statistics as to how we've done so far with the grant, like from last year?
Yeah, we were fortunate enough, we get notified we apply in May, and we get notified in usually November, late November, early December every year. And we've been really fortunate that we've been able to fund one of our domestic violence prosecutors out of this grant for the last 20 years. So we're really happy and excited about that, and we will continue to apply for that each year in hopes that they still like what we're doing or whatever with that grant money. So.
Okay, great. And I have 3 readings for this one, and Mr. Stoughton, I have you as my second. Does anybody have any questions regarding this resolution? Okay. Moving on, temporary resolution 3-21. This is also coming through Finance. This is a resolution authorizing the disposition of city property via an auction or internet auctions. This is also an annual piece, and it allows us to dispose of city property that is no longer being used. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, I have 3 readings, and Mrs. Bobbitt, I have you as my second, please.
Thank you.
Temporary resolution 4-21. This is a resolution to allow the Lancaster City Auditor to request an advance of funds from the Fairfield County of the city's apportionment of tax settlements. This is our annual beginning of the year piece for the county auditor, which allows Mrs. Nettles to request an advance on real estate settlements. Would you like to add anything to that? Okay. I have 2 readings, and Mr. Stoughton, I have you as my second on this one. Any questions on this resolution? All right. Temporary resolution 5-21. This is coming through water pollution control. It is an annual piece. Mr. James.
Yes, I think this is pretty straightforward. This is some of the chemicals that they need for the processing of the water. Is there anything, Mike, you wanted to say about it? Pretty standard. And Mr. Hull will be my second.
And I have 3 readings, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Any questions on this resolution? Temporary resolution 6-21. Again, this is an annual piece coming through water pollution control for phosphate. Mr. James.
Same explanation as we had on temporary resolution 5-21. And Becky Teener will be my second on that, and that could also go 3 readings.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this resolution? All right. Temporary Resolution 7-21, this is coming through safety. Again, this is an annual piece so that the police department can apply for the drug use prevention grant. Mrs. Bobbitt.
Thank you. I think the chief is out here in the audience. I'll have him come up to the podium and speak on this annual piece.
Yeah, good evening. It's really our annual piece where we can apply for reimbursement for time that our DARE officers spend in schools, is what it mostly is. And we generally generate about $18,000 of money back to us through it.
Thank you. And since it's money coming in as a grant, I'd like to suspend on this evening, please.
Okay, and I have Mr. Matlin as your second.
Yeah.
And we said $18,000, right? Typically?
What you
Yes.
said.
Okay. Any questions on 7-21? All right, temporary resolution 8-21, coming through Public Works. Again, this is an annual piece for sodium chloride. Mr. Schoonover.
Yeah, annual piece. I hadn't heard from Greg what this year's cost is looking at like right now, but it's 3 readings, so make sure to get that for you before we ask to pass.
Okay, and I have Mr. James as your second, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Any questions on 8-21? Temporary Resolution 9-21, this is also coming through finance. This is a resolution to cover the cost of legal services, that were needed to assist in the development and implementation of the public right-of-way and adopt new regulations. Mr. Olam or Mitch, do you have any
I apologize, which one is it? I apologize.
9-21?
921.
Oh,
This is the gas fund.
Oh.
Yeah,
I can explain for that,
So-
Law Director Olem,
Go ahead.
unless you would like to. This is the balance of the monies that we carry over, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, yes.
So you wanna go ahead and speak on that?
Yeah, this is just the carryover funds that we had when we initially financed this for assistance with outside legal counsel on our right-of-way ordinance, and kind of working through our implementation and everything of that. So we're just looking forward, or looking to carry over that funding in case we have any additional expenses with regard to our right-of-way ordinance.
okay,
Thank you, sorry.
thank you.
I'm here now.
Okay, you're with us now, right? All caught up. I have 2 readings, and I have Mrs. Bobbitt as my second.
Okay.
Are there any additional questions on 9-21? Okay, seeing none. We'll go to 10-21. Mr. James, this is for appropriating funds for the Stormwater Utility Reserve Fund.
Yes, I would like to yield some time to Ms. Denise Cruz to give us a little more explanation of this.
I don't know that there's a lot of explanation. This is our annual piece. We take whatever money's left in the improvement accounts at the end of the year and then reappropriate it and add in any money we expect to take into those accounts. There was an error on your initial piece of legislation in section 3, and I believe Clerk Sandy has revised that. So we're expecting $1.4 million in receipts in the Stormwater Improvement Fund. And I do have outstanding invoices, so if you could suspend and pass on 1 reading, that would be great.
So I had Mrs. Teener as the second, but since she is not going to be here this evening,
I'm gonna ask Mr. Hall
okay.
to second that for us tonight.
Did she say this, the amount was wrong?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Are
one point,
are we corrected the,
it's corrected.
okay,
Yeah,
all right.
you may not have it, but it's 1.4
Yeah.
at the bottom.
Or it's typed out.
You say the correct number is 1.4?
Yeah.
1.4 million, that's correct.
Yeah, so if that's what you have, that's correct.
And section 3, right?
Right.
All right, so in section 3, the amount should be $1.4 million.
Yes.
Not 5.6. All right, good, thank you.
Any other questions on 10-21? Okay, 11-21, this is also an annual piece, I think, right?
Yes, it is. And I think the same, similar explanation that Denise gave for 1021 will apply to this one as well. And I would respectfully request that we do this in one reading as well. And Mr. Hall will be my second on that.
Okay. Any questions on 11-21? Okay, 12-21. This is, again, carryover and appropriation of funds for wastewater replacement and improvement fund. Another annual piece for appropriations not included in the 2021 budget, coming through water pollution control. Mr. James.
Yes, I think once again, the explanation that we've given for an annual piece will apply to this particular one as well. And I would like to have this one as a one reading as well.
Okay. Any questions on 12-21? Mr. Hall. Temporary resolution 13-21. No, that's what I just said, right?
Yeah,
13.
Sorry.
13.
There's so many.
Yeah, they
There's a
all
lot.
look
They're the same.
There's a bunch.
They look
the same. Okay, so we're on 13.
correct.
Okay, 13-21. No, I am not
You were
here
doing well
tonight.
after that
I was
point.
doing great until I heard the bell going off.
13 in, that's good.
Come on.
Hey, again, an annual piece for appropriations not included in the 2021 budget, water pollution control. Mr. James.
Once again, I think the explanation that this is indeed an annual fund for appropriation purposes, and I would respectfully ask for a single reading on this tonight as well. And Mr. Hull will be my second.
Okay. Any other questions on 13-21? All right. Temporary resolution 14-21. This is a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Zayo Group for the purpose of installation of fiber optic cables. Do I have that right, Mitch? And it's coming through Public Works. Mr. Schoonover.
Mitch had sent out an email last week with kind of an explanation of this, if he wants to come up since he's here, if you guys have any questions on the whole process.
Yeah, so very briefly, this has been something that the engineer's office has been dealing with for about a year and a half. This is kind of long-haul fiber. This fiber is actually running from Columbus to Washington, D.C. Zayo Group is a telecommunications provider that they have large, long-haul fiber all throughout the United States. They got these long sections that run from major corporations to other major municipalities, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Chicago down to the south. So this is another section of fiber that's running through our town or through Fairfield County, through a lot of ODOT state highways. We've been negotiating with them for a long time because we didn't necessarily like the route that they chose. We've manipulated them around a couple of times and finally came to this route. And this temporary resolution 1421 coincides with ordinance 121. So there are some easements that we are granting through various pieces of city property. I sent out that picture just to kind of explain what that kind of looks like as it runs through the city. A lot of it is within city right-of-way, and then there's other portions of it that are on city-owned property. So we've negotiated various things through the agreement of getting 19 locations that we can tap into this long-haul fiber. And it actually runs, they give us 12 dark fibers starting at basically Collins Road, clear down to the south water plant down on Sugar Grove Road, south of town. So, in a nutshell, that's what it is. Cecil here, our right-of-way inspector, he's done a lot of the heavy lifting on this stuff. They're actually out working on the southern part of our town right now. They're in our right-of-ways, coming up from Sugar Grove Road and starting to work their way to the north. The main hub is, if you look at where Target is, Target and Mr. Nixon's wastewater, his pump station right there at the corner, you'll see this little building that sits back there all by itself, and if you've ever wondered what the heck that is a lot of fibers that come into that little section. There's Horizon Telecom, there's this Ornet, I'm not even gonna get into weeds on this, but there's a lot of things that come into that thing that kind of give connectivity all over the place. So that's it in a nutshell. If you have questions, I can explain it further, but that's what you're looking at today.
Mr. James?
And when you say dark fiber lines, those are available lines.
Available
Right.
lines, yeah.
And you said how many connection points could we?
19.
19 along, all in the city limits? Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a plug-in, through our IT department, if they decide to light up that fiber or use that dark fiber and light it up, Mark Starr, our IT director, has been involved with these negotiations as well, trying to make sure that it fits with what we need to do and where it connects, and then also with our LDOT folks, because they're strategically placed along where some of our traffic signals are and where those could splice off and maybe split off of Memorial Drive and so on, so.
Mr. Stoughton?
I have a dumb question. What do these 79 blocks on here mean?
Those 79 blocks are, this is associated with a set of construction drawings. So that would be sheets within the construction drawings that are shown.
Gotcha. Thank
I
you.
just didn't want to show you 79
No,
sheets.
that's good.
Yes, thank you for that. Mr. Matlin?
So it looks like a lot of this is on Memorial Drive. Is this underground, overhead?
Underground,
So do they bore or they trench?
bore.
So
It's-
that you won't be disturbing street paving or sidewalks or any of that?
Intermittently where they actually, they have to come up and place handholds, or they have like places where that, intermittently there will be like on the sidewalk, they're not gonna be underneath Memorial Drive, but
Okay.
alongside of Memorial Drive. And, essentially all the way up to Pierce Avenue, then coming down Pierce Avenue and getting in behind. And then once they get behind where I talked about that, it's called the POP, Point of Presence is what the acronym is. And they get behind the River Valley Mall and they kind of travel along. Mike has a large force main that runs behind River Valley Mall, kind of cuts across Edie Road, and then the land bank gifted some things to Mike Tharp behind Colonial Estates, if you follow where I'm going behind in there. And then hopefully we can piggyback on whatever type of construction road they make on that to extend a bike path through that section and runs clear to Collins Road. And then at that point, it's in the county, so. It's a large project, and I know that, to give a little background, the state and both county engineers, the state has been dealing with these guys for probably close to maybe 2 years prior to coming to us, because you would think that they would just go down the bypass, right? That makes more sense, right? Well, there's been multiple lawsuits with these folks, and long story short, this was the determined path, and we were able to get some of the things out of it that we thought were important to us, and that's where we're at.
Any other, Melody?
So when you say a large project, I mean, I see this, what's the timing? How long is this large project gonna take?
Well,
1 year, 2 year?
Cecil, what did they say? They told us some very short time frame that we thought was ridiculous.
Okay.
I would say a few months in my.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions on 14-21? Thanks, Mitch. And, Mr. Schooner, I have one reading, and I have Mr. James as your second.
Yes,
Is
please.
that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Temporary Resolution 15-21. This is a resolution to increase receipts in the Water Utility Reserve Fund, coming through Water Pollution Control, Mr. James.
Basically, this is just a matter of keeping a larger cash balance in our water utility reserve fund, and that's to meet the covenant for the water revenue bond. I don't know if there's anything you need to add to that, Mike?
Mr. James, I think you handled it pretty well. We were fortunate enough to end the year about $400,000 to the plus, black side on the Division of Water, not a lot of money, but per the bond covenant, we moved that into the utility reserve fund, and then we'll have those dollars available for future projects, or the money, if need be, could go back into the water revenue fund if we have a shortage or whatever. But this is just an annual piece, and we're not always able to do on the water side. We've been more fortunate on the wastewater side. So it can go to full 3 readings.
Okay,
And then I have Mrs. Teener as your second on that one.
that is correct as well.
Okay, any questions on 15-21? Okay, 16-21, same thing, I think.
This is actually for the wastewater revenue bond, that we have to maintain a larger cash balance in order to keep that covenant. Go ahead, Mike, with what else you got?
And again, this one, we were fortunate enough with the way the rate structure is set up that we'll be able to put $2.2 million into the wastewater utility reserve fund, and those will be used for various future projects relating possibly to expansion of treatment plants, engineering work associated with that, the CSO, long-term control plan projects. So this money will be cash on hand that we'll have that we can hopefully offset, mitigate, eliminate future rate increases. So this is part of the plan to build some funds up so that we're not on the market borrowing more money. We're in debt quite a lot as it is. So we're trying to minimize that as we move forward. So 3 readings will be fine.
Thanks, Mike.
And I have Mr. Hall as your second on that one.
That is correct.
Okay, any questions on 16-21? Okay, we're getting there. Temporary Resolution 17-21, this is a resolution to enter into a contract for the Edie Road Safety Improvements Project. Coming through Public Works, Mr. Schoonover.
This is our, I don't want to jinx us and say final piece, but the final contract with ODOT for the Edie Road improvement and expansion, if you will. If you want to add to that, you can, but there's no additional monies right now that we would need to spend on that.
Yeah, correct. Thanks, Corey. The final legislation here, based on the estimates and based on our OPWC grant that we received, which was $250,000, we were able to use that dollar amount to use as our matching funds, so we don't, we do not need to add any city dollars to this construction project at this time. So typically, if we were short on funds, we would be, cutting a check to ODOT to cover those shortages. At this time, though, based on the estimates, and then if, say, the estimates were to come in higher, or if there are change orders throughout the project, that's where maybe city funding might have to fill in those gaps. But right now, it's ready to be bid. I don't know if you've been by there any time at all today, but they started on relocation of the South Central power lines. They're gonna start setting poles over the next 2 weeks, so excited to get that started.
Okay, great. Any questions? Nope, thank you. I have one reading, and I'm the second.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Temporary Resolution 18-21. This is coming through Economic Development and deals with the acceptance of EDA funds awarded to the city. Do I have that right, Mr. McDaniel?
Well, yes, it actually, we are selected, a preliminary selection. We've got some additional documentation we need to submit, but this legislation will allow the mayor to act on behalf of the city and move this grant request forward in hopes that we do get funded. This would be the connector that we approved back in December to apply for the Ewing Street connector. This is the planning study that we want to get funded through these funds. So we were one of the few projects selected to move forward, so this would allow us to do so.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yeah, Linda might have more detail than I have.
Well, I'm not sure what to do in this situation, but this also is meant to specify that the Port Authority is providing the match.
We have the legislation with the Port Authority, that I was just gonna provide them that legislation or whatever to, because, did you want me to reference that in here as well? Because they're getting two pieces of legislation. They're gonna get the Port Authority legislation that actually says,
And they got that already.
okay,
I submitted that with the
Okay.
application. I'm sorry to have this conversation.
Yep.
I just saw this when I came in, so I
Yeah.
apologize.
sorry, okay.
Would it be okay for it to be in this legislation and then we're just covered? Or is it not really the council's purview to have it in the resolution?
I mean, it would just be they would just be referencing that piece of legislation of the Port Authority, because there's no authority here for,
Yeah, I think if we just include that, then we're doubly covered and that would be great.
those two pieces. Yeah, I'm gonna do a cleanup piece for the Port Authority tomorrow as well, so we'll have both of those for you.
So, just building on what Mr. McDaniel said, we've been asked for more information. So you did pass this, but we did not they wanted the mayor, they wanted more detail. Who would be responsible or who would be speaking on behalf of the city or signing on behalf of the city, so that we're adding the mayor for that. Then also recognition by this body that the match is coming from the Port Authority. We do have a resolution from the Port Authority, and that was submitted with our original application, but we're just trying to provide the follow-up documents that have been requested. And as Mr. McDaniel said, there are other applications that have been denied, so we're really excited to still be in the running for this.
Okay, Mr. Stoughton?
Remind me again, this is for kind of to do the study on that connector, correct?
Right, traffic study, destination and origin and destination of the truck traffic.
Sure, so what's the amount of the grant that we're asking for? And-
We're asking for $80,000. The Port Authority is providing the match of $20,000, so it's a $100,000
Okay.
project.
Yeah, I just wanted to get the details.
Yep,
Thank you.
yep.
Okay.
Got that. Thank you.
Any other questions? So I'm showing that, you want to suspend on this tonight. Are we able to do that?
Yeah, we need to suspend because I think we have to submit this to them later this week or whatever, so, and I apologize for the confusion. The way I read their letter was they wanted clarification that the money was basically appropriated and encumbered for that purpose, which lead me to believe I need to do a cleanup piece with my Port Authority legislation that's actually giving the match funds. So I didn't include it in this, so that was my interpretation of what they were asking, so.
Okay. And then I have Mr. Stoughton as your second.
Yes.
All right. Last resolution, as far as I know, 19-21. This is coming through finance. This is a resolution to appropriate funds for the Edie Road improvements and the Magna contractual services. And Mitch, we think this is done, right? All right, I have one reading. Do you wanna go? The audience.
I just wanted to mention, I believe that a lot of these things are done. Edie Road, I wouldn't say Edie Road is done, because I believe we still have some outstanding things that are happening here before it goes out to bid, that I still need to pay consultants for addendas and things like that before February 27th. The Magna side, I do believe that that's done. ODOT and through the TID has constructed the signal out by Delmont Road 188. That's in service. I do not believe there's any change orders associated with that project, so anyhow, and the Magna Bridge, we're still trying to deal with FEMA, trying to get the floodplains all kind of worked out, but I do not believe there's anything left on that project, so.
Okay. Any questions on 19-21? So we'll suspend on this tonight, and Mrs. Bobbitt, I have you as my second.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other resolutions to come before finance tonight? Okay, seeing none, we will move to ordinances. I have one ordinance for finance and one ordinance for President Uhl. Temporary ordinance 2-21, is an ordinance to amend, ordinance 31-20. And this ordinance pertains to a retirement in the tax department that will actually occur in March of 2021. Originally, we were going to suspend on this tonight, but we are changing that to 2 readings. And, Treasurer Wolfinger, do you wanna provide some context around that?
Sure, you did a real nice job on that, but a longtime employee has announced their retirement, I believe effective May 1st or April 30th. Not a real good time in that we need to be bringing somebody in to start training them, and the tax commissioner would like to have the availability of bringing somebody in, and that's what the pay ordinance references to 21 through April 30th. There'll be a resolution coming in next week, or the 25th, that will give you all the financial numbers of this, plus there'll be retirement type buyouts and things of that nature. So that's why we could go 2 readings with the second reading on the 25th. Thank you.
Okay. And, Mr. Stoughton, I have you as my second on that ordinance. Does anybody have any questions at this time on that pay ordinance? I'm sure more detail will happen at the next meeting. Okay. Are there any other ordinances for finance? Seeing none, we will move to departmental updates. Do we have any departmental updates tonight? Yes, Linda?
So I want to thank you for approving the legislation on the community development block grant funds through the CARES Act in December, and waiving the second and third readings so we could move forward on that process. So we are having a public hearing on Wednesday via Zoom. It's at 3 o'clock, Wednesday, January 13th. People can register for this public hearing going to the city's website and then to the community development webpage. And we're looking forward to public comment. We have funds available for working capital for small businesses up to 25 employees, with an emphasis on businesses with 5 and under employees. And this also means businesses that do not have employees. So we've been asked that question. Welcome everyone's comments and suggestions. Looking forward to answering more questions during the public hearing. I'll be walking folks through the application process, and we will be recording it, and the recording will be on the city's website. Yes.
So, at this public hearing, you said that you'll be explaining the application, and then, so they'll know where to get the application then?
Right?
Okay.
And it's right on our webpage.
Okay, I must have missed it, because I looked for it today. I must have missed it. I'll look tomorrow.
Give me a call on the
Okay.
community development webpage.
I probably need assistance.
No worries. That's what I'm here for.
Okay.
And the application is open, so businesses can apply at any time. We do have a committee of folks that are going to be reviewing the applications and making the decisions. So we'll be doing that on a rolling basis. all the applications that we receive by the third Friday of the month. The committee will be evaluating, will be reviewing and making decisions by the fourth Thursday of the month. So, you know, folks can start applying now, but if they don't apply, you know, this month, then we'll be reviewing next month, so,
Thank you.
yep.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Any questions? No?
Are there any other departmental updates? All right. I will turn the floor over to President Wu for tonight's meeting prep.
Thank you, Ms. Downhour. We don't really have anything more to do tonight other than temporary ordinance 1-21, which Mitch referenced earlier during finance, where this is the easements that go along with that temporary resolution. Mitch, you have anything else you want to add to this? Mitch is shaking his head back and forth as to suggest he does not. Thank you for that. With that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Great, thank you. Are there any other items for finance? Okay, seeing none, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion, we adjourn?
Second.
We are adjourned at 6:36 PM.
The regular meeting of Lancaster City Council will begin at 6:45.
There is no place like Lancaster, Ohio, and Fairfield County, and like you, I am proud to call them home. As a longtime resident of Lancaster and graduate of Lancaster High School, this community is important to me, and I want to provide superior customer service, professionalism, integrity, and honesty at the Connor Insurance Agency. I am committed to supporting local programs and projects through my volunteer work and board membership with several organizations. It has been a great honor to work with all the first responders throughout Lancaster, Fairfield County, and the state of Ohio to put on Kids and Cops Day, to be a part of Shop with a Cop alongside the Lancaster Police Department and JFS, and to help Lancaster Public Education Foundation raise funds to support our local public schools and teachers. These men and women work hard to protect and support our community, and I would like to take this moment to say thank you for all they do. My goal as a business owner and insurance agent is to provide my clients with the most appropriate services and coverage for their needs at a competitive rate. As an independent agent, I have several carriers to choose from so I can customize your insurance coverage to fit your needs and desires. I strive to make sure there are no gaps in your coverage that could be harmful, and just as important, that you are not overinsured. I look forward to serving your insurance needs now and in the future. At Connor Insurance, we are here to serve you by protecting what is important to you. Please contact my office at 740-654-2848 for a full list of services and carriers, or visit my website, ConnorInsuranceAgency.com.
Swing into the Carriage Company and check out our sweet deals.
If you're looking for the best selection of clean, quality used vehicles, look no further than the Carriage Company. You'll feel secure with your purchase, knowing all vehicles undergo an extensive safety and service check prior to the sale. And all vehicles can be viewed online at carriagecompany.com. The Carriage Company, located at 1031 North Memorial Drive in Lancaster.
So wait!
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our two locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
Good evening. Welcome to Lancaster City Council. Please join me in a word of prayer. Father, we come to you today thankful for your many, many blessings, thankful for how you have continued to be with us and to help us to lead, guide, and direct us. Lord, as we think about who you are and what you represent through your Son, Jesus Christ, we're reminded that indeed our desire is for peace on earth. And as we pray for peace on earth, Father, we pray that it would begin with each one of us. May you continue to be with us, with local, state, and federal elected officials, first responders here and around our country, with our military men and women who continue to fight to preserve, protect, and defend our freedom. And may you bless us this night in all that we have to do that is set before us, that we might serve the people of Lancaster in the best way that we can. And we'll continue to ask for your help and give you praise and glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I hereby call this meeting of Lancaster City Council to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Here.
Mrs. Downhour?
Here.
Mr. Hall?
Here.
Mr. James?
Here.
Mr. Matlin?
Here.
Mr. McDaniel?
Here.
Mr. Schoonover?
Here.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Here.
And Mrs. Teener?
Let the record reflect that 8 of 9 members of City Council are in attendance tonight. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council excuse Councilwoman Teener from tonight's meeting.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to excuse Ms. Teener from tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Ms. Teener is excused, and let me welcome each one of you tonight and welcome you to 2021 and a brand new legislative year. I'm looking forward to serving together throughout 2021. Reading and disposing of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated December 14th, 2020.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the journal. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Reports of city officials.
Email dated December 15th, 2020 regarding the 2021 Public Works Committee meeting date submitted by Mr. Schoonover. Email dated December 28th, 2020 regarding the 2021 Service Committee date submitted by Mrs. Teener. Email dated December 28th, 2020 regarding the 2021 Economic Development meeting dates submitted by Mr. McDaniel. Email dated January 8th, 2021 regarding the temporary resolution 14-21 and temporary ordinance -1-21 submitted by City Engineer Mitch Nolan. Email dated January 11th, 2020 regarding the Finance Committee agenda submitted by Mrs. Downhour. And finally, an email dated January the 11th, 2020 regarding the 2021 Safety Committee date submitted by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of city officials.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of city officials. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any communications?
There is one, an email dated December 14th, 2020 regarding copy of the 2021 budget submitted by Barrett Lawless of the Lancaster Eagle Gazette.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to receive and file the communication.
Second?
A motion and a second to receive and file the communication. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any petitions or memorials?
There are none to be presented.
During this time at Lancaster City Council, we set time aside to allow the voters and taxpayers of the city to address City Council on any item or issue they would like. Before I go through the entire spiel, is there anyone who would like to address Lancaster City Council this evening? Seeing that there is someone, I'll go ahead and finish. I'll remind those who want to address City Council that you need to be a resident of the city of Lancaster in order to do so. We'll also or a taxpayer. We'll also ask that, per the rules of council, that you keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. In addition, we'll note that members of City Council will not respond to you during this time of our meeting, but may choose to do so at a time later on into the future. With that, ma'am, if you'll just state your name and address for the record. I saw you signed in, and then you can begin.
My name is Stephanie Renner, and I live at 527 Goodwin Avenue.
On October 12, 2020, the instigators and I were encouraged to see the council pass a resolution to denounce white supremacy and hate groups. This was a direct response to our lobbying efforts on behalf of a coalition of citizens who understood the growing sentiments of hate brewing in the unchecked privilege of local bad faith actors. Part of our lobbying efforts was also to have councilperson Becky Teener offer an apology to the marginalized people of the community, both for her disparaging remarks about welfare and ignorance to the academic theories of white privilege, as well as her implicit support for bad faith actors by standing with the Proud Boys and the Lancaster citizens who welcomed them here. To this date, we have heard no such apology. On November 7th, 2020, a good friend of Becky Teener, Frank Clark, attended a rally at the Columbus State House, acting as a provocateur of white supremacy and racism. In a now deleted video, which you can inquire for a link to at instigatorsohio.org, Frank is heard yelling at peaceful protesters, quote, "White lives matter, KKK, white power," end quote. Seen in the images being passed around, Councilperson Teener engages in some friendly banter with Frank Clark. To be clear, the video was long, and it could have been that Councilperson Teener didn't catch his racist behavior. That's why our organization made a special video edit tagging Councilperson Teener and offering her an opportunity to clear the air. The video was shared dozens of times and then was thus immediately deleted, yet no word from Councilperson Teener. In the images being passed around, you'll notice a picture of a beautiful arrangement of flowers. That is a post from the Facebook page of Frank Clark's wife, Mary. Mary says, quote, "Thank you, Becky Teener, for the beautiful flowers and goodies. Kiddos love their stuff. Merry Christmas to you. We are blessed to have met you and have you as part of our life. You are an amazing person and hope you have a great Christmas," end quote. Councilperson Teener replies, quote, "You are too kind, Mary Clark. I really enjoy all of you," end quote. On October 12, 2020, Councilperson Teener voted in the unanimous block of council members to denounce white supremacy and hate groups. Like I said, my fellow citizens and I were encouraged by the passing of the resolution, but my fellow citizens and I were also cautious. We recognize that in the political opportune moment, public officials were quick to pass these types of resolutions, both to meet the ceremonial responsibility of their office and also to quell the nuisance many felt the cause to be. The Oxford Dictionary defines denounce as the following: a verb, to publicly declare to be wrong or evil or inform against. In 2020, every council member was given a copy of the essay, "What is White Privilege Really?" To this date, our organization has received no outreach about guidance or inquiry on how to address the complex issues of white supremacy or the structural or cultural racism that is entrenched in rural cultures like Lancaster. As stated before, to this date, we have not heard an apology from Becky Teener about her missteps through the conflicts in the summer and the fall. What's more, as laid out in this address, instead of denouncing the citizens actively engaged in white supremacy, it appears that Councilperson Teener gave them Christmas presents. Since June of 2020, citizens of this city warned our local officials, police, and administrators about the dangers of white supremacy in rural communities like Lancaster. We were given grim warnings from the FBI and the Department of Justice about growing right-wing terrorist cells. In fact, right-wing white supremacist violence is the #1 domestic terrorist threat, according to these same law enforcement agencies. We asked for an apology from Councilperson Teener, who I can see is not here, so I hope you guys can pass along this word to her. Because whether she meant it or not, local terrorist sympathizers took her presence downtown as support for their cause, for their ideology, and in effect, support for domestic terrorist actors like the Proud Boys. After seeing the Proud Boys, neo-Nazis, and other white supremacist groups we warned the city about terrorize the nation's capital on January 6th and kill 5 people, we're curious, Becky Teener, if you're willing to apologize now.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address Lancaster City Council this evening? You can go ahead and begin, sir, and then sign in afterward, please.
Thank you, Council. On October 12th, 2020, this City Council unanimously passed a resolution condemning white supremacy and hate groups. As a representative for the coalition of citizens who lobbied for that action, I am here tonight to demand that this vocal resolution begin to manifest into tangible policy and legislation in our city. So, on November 6th, local business owner, anti-masker, anti-vaxxer, anti-choice religious fundamentalist Aaron Liu posted to his Facebook page, "That moment when you wake up and realize that we're at war. Bride, you best open your eyes. Drag yourself out of that bunker, strap on your boots, and fight. This is not a game. This is an alarm." Unquote. On January 6th, Lou posted a picture of him and his son, boasting and confirming his presence in D.C. during the domestic terrorist attack on our nation's capital. Mayor Scheffler liked this post. Over the weekend, the mayor also released a co-signed statement, which I firmly support, denouncing that violence at the Capitol and calling to heal political divisions. The comments on that post are filled with locals that we've all seen, debasing him with arguments like the election was stolen, pedophiles, revolutions, and threat of violence against his life. Locals. One comment stood out to me, though. Quote, "If you condemn the actions of the people who were in the rallies in D.C., then why are you liking the pictures of the locals that were here?" End quote. I don't suspect the mayor has bad intentions. Over the weekend, local terrorist sympathizer Shauna Lopez posted a call of action against the mayor in what she believed was a divisive statement. When questioned about the absurdity of her anger against the call for unity, her response, "Show up. I dare anyone who tries. You know, the whole stand your ground that was just passed. Anyway, we'll be on the sidewalk." End quote. I would be remiss to fail to mention that Shauna Lopez is good friends with none other than our beloved councilperson, Becky Teener. Her support has emboldened these local terrorist supporters to believe they have representation in this city's council chambers. They believe this. I don't have to tell anyone how abhorrently enraged many people in this community feel, let alone the country. What makes it worse, the terrorist acts we saw in the Capitol last week were carried out by some of the same violent groups who infiltrated our community last year, and that we spent the last half of 2020 trying to warn the city about. The instigators and city coalition that joined us spent the last half of 2020 promoting wellness for the community in the wake of the movement for Black Lives because we understood the volatility of the moment and the proximity of violence we faced. We did this not only because it was the moral thing to do for an oppressed people, but because white supremacy and hate groups affect the totality of a community, a country, and thus our society. Maybe months ago it was difficult for some of you to see why the movement for Black Lives is important in a place like Lancaster, but God willing, I pray that you understand now. The hatred and vitriol of white supremacy and hate groups doesn't merely threaten people of color. That should be enough, but if it isn't, you now know that hate has no bounds. That's why extremists and fundamentalists should be taken seriously, whether they're stay-at-home moms like Shauna Lopez or wealthy business owners like Aaron Liu. We should rebuke, shun, and condemn their ignorant, violent rhetoric. These actors should not benefit from destination downtown programs, business development programs, or any other social subsidized program made possible by our city and its citizens. And before I go, I have one last piece of personal business to settle. The last time I was in these chambers, Councilperson Corey Schoonover begged the question, what's the difference between my outrage towards the inaction of white supremacy and hate groups, rallying with city council members, and his disposition towards me not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance? A few of the council, most vocally Councilperson Schoonover, seemed offended at the idea that my fellow citizens and I insisted on a public revocation of violence, racism, and inhumane activity in our community. Mr. Schoonover wondered out loud, he said this out loud, what the difference was between my outrage, our outrage about systemic racism, and his outrage against
Thank you,
our
sir. Your time
staying
has
the pledge.
expired. Thank you for being here tonight. Is there anyone else who would like to address Lancaster City Council this evening? He did sign, right? Well, we know who he is. Anyone else who'd like to address Lancaster City Council? All right, then we will move along to the next item of business, reports of standing committees.
I think this is the most we've had at one time. Finance Committee meeting dated December 14th, 2020, submitted by Mrs. Downhour. Code Enforcement and Zoning meeting dated December 7th, 2020, submitted by Mr. Matlin. IT Committee meeting dated July 17, 2020, and November 20th, 2020, submitted by Mr. Stoughton. Public Works Committee meeting dated December the 11th, 2020, submitted by Mr. Schoonover. Water Pollution Control meeting dated December 9th, 2020, submitted by Mr. James. Law Committee meetings dated July 15th, September 19th, and October 14th of 2020, submitted by Mr. Hall. Service Committee dates dated October 2nd, 2020, submitted by Mrs. Teener. And finally, the Safety Committee meeting minutes dated September 25th, 2020, submitted by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
Second?
A motion and a second to receive and file reports of standing committees. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there reports of special committees this
There are
evening?
none to be presented.
We have no public hearings tonight, so we'll move to the reading of resolutions, beginning with the second reading of temporary resolution 135-20.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the preliminary study and to report phase of the Miller Park Water Plant Replacement Project, offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
Yes, just as a reminder, this is actually an agreement with Arcadis to look into where we might put a new water treatment facility. So at this time, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to waive and suspend its rules for the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 135-20.
Mr. Hall. That's okay. We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 135-20. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. James.
Yes, Mr. President, now at this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record resolution temporarily numbered 135-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 135-20. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 135-20 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 136-20.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the Wiley Road Water Loop Project, offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
Yes, once again, just as a reminder, this particular resolution will allow additional water line loop there on Wiley Road that's going to help future businesses as well as service the businesses now in place. And, Mr. President, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution number 136-20.
Second.
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 136-20. Further discussion, Mr. James?
No, no thanks.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. James.
Yes, Mr. President, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record temporary resolution numbered 136-20.
Second.
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 136-20. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 136-20 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 137-20.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the Northeast gas main replacement project, offered by Mrs. Teener, seconded by Mrs. Bobbit.
Ms. Bobbit.
Second reading.
Second reading on temporary resolution 137-20. We now have first reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 1-21.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and to amend the certificate of appropriations with the county auditor in the VAWA Fund 2205, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbit.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 1-21.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 1-21. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
I will save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Ms. Downhour.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 1-21.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 1-21. Discussion, Ms. Downhour?
Yes, thank you. This resolution is to make an amendment so that we can, add the workers' compensation funds to the grant application that was completed in May of 2020.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 1-21 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 2-21.
A resolution authorizing the Law Director's Office to apply for the Violence Against Women Act grant, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
First of three readings, please.
First of three readings on temporary resolution 2-21. Temporary resolution 3-21.
A resolution authorizing the disposition of city property no longer needed via auction or internet auctions for 2021, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbit.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes, thank you. First of three readings, please.
First of three readings on temporary resolution 3-21. Temporary resolution 4-21.
A resolution to allow the Lancaster City Auditor to request an advance of funds from Fairfield County of the city's apportionment of tax settlements for 2021, offered by Mrs. Downhour and seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
Yes, first of two readings, please.
First of two readings on temporary resolution 4-21. Temporary resolution 5-21.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the purchase of salt for use by the Water Department, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
This is just an annual piece to allow for the chemicals that you need for water treatment process. And this will be the first of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary resolution 5-21. Temporary resolution 6-21.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the purchase of phosphate for use by the Water Department, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Yes, the same explanation as I offered before. It is for the water treatment process, and this will be the first of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary resolution 6-21. Temporary resolution 7-21.
A resolution authorizing the Lancaster Police Department to apply for the 2020 through 2021 Drug Use Prevention Grant, offered by Mrs. Bobbit, seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Sorry, I was in the
That's all right. Your drink, I hit your drink and it wants to fly
That's
off.
fine. Let me move that over there. There we go. Ms. Bobbit.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion the council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading on temporary resolution number 721.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 7-21. Discussion, Ms. Bobbit.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Ms. Bobbit.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution number 721.
Second.
Motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 7-21. Discussion, Ms. Bobbit.
As we heard from the police chief during the finance meeting, this is a grant that the city, the city gets every year. It's an annual piece. We've received up to $18,000 from this grant in the past.
Very good, thank you, Ms. Bobbitt. Is there further discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 7-21 passes 8-0. Temporary Resolution 8-21.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an agreement with ODOT to purchase sodium chloride, rock salt, for the 2021 through 2022 winter season, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. James.
Mr. Schoonover.
First of 3 readings, please.
First 3 readings on Temporary Resolution 8-21. Temporary Resolution 9-21.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor for the Gas Fund 6002, Water Fund 6003, Water Pollution Fund 6004, the Stormwater Fund 6006, and General Fund 1001, and if needed, issue one then and now certificate for payment to PNC, offered by Mrs. Downhour and seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour.
Am I suspending or is it two?
Two. First of 2.
First of two.
First of 2 readings on Temporary Resolution 9-21. Temporary Resolution 10-21.
A resolution to appropriate from in the Stormwater Utility Reserve Fund 6019, amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor, increase receipts, and approve the issuance of then and now certificates for purchase orders previously encumbered in the 6019 fund and now reappropriated in the 6019 account. Offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
Yes, this particular piece of legislation we discussed in the Finance Committee meeting, and it's pretty much a cleanup piece for the end of the year to be able to go ahead and pay some of the bills that we have already encumbered. And, Mr. President, at this time, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution number 10-21.
Second. A motion and a second to suspend the rules, waive the second and third reading of Temporary Resolution 10-21. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. James.
Yes, Mr. President, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record temporary resolution numbered 10-21.
Second. We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Temporary Resolution 10-21. Discussion, Mr. James.
No need for any more discussion.
Any further discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 10-21 passes 8-0. Temporary Resolution 11-21.
A resolution to appropriate funds in the water and wastewater construction funds and the water and wastewater reserve funds, amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor, increase receipts, and approve the issuance of then and now certificates for payment of bills for purchase orders previously encumbered in Funds 6026, 6027, 6029, and 6030, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We actually, as this is once again a cleanup piece for the end of the year to allow the work that's been done to be paid for. So, Mr. President, this time I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution numbered 11-21.
Second. We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of Temporary Resolution 11-21. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. James?
Yes, Mr. President, at this time, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record temporary resolution numbered 11-21.
Second. We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Temporary Resolution 11-21. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 11-21 passes 8-0. Temporary Resolution 12-21.
A resolution to carry over and appropriate funds to pay bills in the wastewater replacement and improvement fund 6023, and to authorize the issuance of then and now certificates for payment of bills, offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
The same explanation for this as some of the two previous ones. And Mr. President, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 12-21.
Second. We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 12-21. Mr. James?
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to suspend? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. James?
Mr. President, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon our written record temporary resolution number 12-21. Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 12-21. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 12-21 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 13-21.
A resolution to carry over and appropriate funds to pay bills in the Water Replacement and Improvement Fund 6025, and to authorize the issuance of then and now certificates for payment of bills, offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Working hard for the money tonight, Mr. James.
I would say. Once again, this is a cleanup piece of legislation. And Mr. President, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution number 13-21. Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 14-21.
13.
13, that's what I said, after I said 14. 13-21. Mr. James.
Nothing further, thanks.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. James.
Yes, Mr. President, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record temporary resolution number 13-21. Second.
A motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 13-21. Mr. James.
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 13-21 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 14-21.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Zayo Group LLC for the installation of a fiber optic telecommunications system and an agreement for an indefeasible right of use therein, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. James.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 14-21.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 14-21. Mr. Schoonover.
Nothing at this time.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Suspend, thank you. It was in stereo from both sides. Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 14-21.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 14-21. Mr. Schoonover.
This piece is a project that's starting or has already started to lay fiber throughout the city. Kind of required some agreements with us through our right-of-ways and easements. So we want to go ahead and pass this tonight to get that project moving forward.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Schoonover. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Schoonover? And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 14-21 passes 8-0. Temporary Resolution 15-21.
A resolution to amend the certificate with the county auditor, appropriate from the unencumbered balance, increase receipts, and complete a fund transfer in the Water Fund 6003 and the Water Utility Reserve Fund 6027, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
As we mentioned in the Finance Committee meeting, this is just merely transfer of funds into, to ensure that we have enough cash on hand for the water revenue bond covenant. And this will be the first of 3 readings.
First of 3 readings then on Temporary Resolution 15-21. Temporary Resolution 16-21.
A resolution to amend the certificate with the county auditor, appropriate from the unencumbered balance, increase receipts, and complete a fund transfer in the wastewater fund 6004 and in the wastewater utility reserve fund 6029, offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
Yes, the same explanation as the previous temporary resolution, only this time it's for the wastewater revenue fund to satisfy that covenant for the bond. And this will be the first of 3 readings.
First of 3 readings on Temporary Resolution 16-21. Temporary Resolution 17-21.
A final resolution to enter into a contract for the Edie Road Safety Improvement Project PID 108470, offered by Mr. Schoonover, seconded by Mrs. Downhour.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of temporary resolution 1721.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of Temporary Resolution 17-21. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Not this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 1721.
Second?
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Temporary Resolution 17-21. Mr. Schoonover.
As we discussed in finance, this is the final resolution for the contract to move forward with ODOT on the Edie Road widening project. So we're excited to move forward with this and get this passed at currently no additional cost to the city.
Very good, thank you. Further discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 17-21 passes 8-0. Temporary Resolution 18-21.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to act on behalf of the city of Lancaster and to enter into any and all agreements required for consideration and award of the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration funding through the Economic Adjustment Assistance CARES Act program and designate the mayor or his designee as a project administrator for the city of Lancaster. Offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 18-21.
Second?
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of Temporary Resolution 18-21. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
I'll save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 18-21.
Second?
Thank you. I was looking to see who it was on the second page. Yes. A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Temporary Resolution 18-21. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, we just discussed this at finance, but I think we had some clarification to the resolution, but we were moved forward in the process of this grant application by the federal government for the CARES Act funding. This is the Ewing Street Connector Study. This legislation clarifies the mayor is authorized to act on behalf of the city in this grant application. It also clarifies the Port Authority would be providing the 20% match of $20,000 for this particular grant.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Further discussion on the motion? Yes.
Just one question. Do we know when the final grants, just following the trail? Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass? What was the
When-
answer?
When he asked,
No, we don't know.
and that was by the mayor.
Yes, by the mayor. We don't know, right, Mayor? Correct.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 18-21 passes 8-0. Temporary Resolution 19-21.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor for the LDOT Improvement Fund 3014 and approve a then and now for the Magna and Edie Road project, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 19-21.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 19-21. Ms. Downhour.
I'll save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 19-21.
Second?
I have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 19-21. Discussion.
Yes, thank you. This resolution is to set an expense budget for the remaining funds in the Magna project and the Edie Road project between State Route 33 and North Columbus Street.
Thank you, Ms. Downhour. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 19-21 passes 8-0. Are there further resolutions to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we'll move to the reading of ordinances, beginning with the second reading of temporary ordinance 34-20.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of notes in the maximum principal amount of $1,500,000 in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of construction and replacement of the Miller Park Water Treatment Plant and the acquisition of real property and the appurtenances necessary thereto, and the acquisition, construction, and installation of wells, raw water distribution piping, approximately 5,300 feet of water lines, new fire hydrants, and appurtenances along Wiley Road and Magna Avenue between certain termini, each including design and engineering work, all together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 34-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 34-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
I will save it.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Ms. Downhour.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 34-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 34-20. Ms. Downhour.
Yes, as it was said in the preamble, this is for the purposes of issuing bonds in an amount of $1.5 million for the cost of construction and replacement of the Miller Park Water Treatment Plant.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 34-20 passes 8-0. We now have first reading on temporary ordinance 1-21.
An ordinance to grant multiple easements to Zayo Group LLC for the construction of fiber optic telecommunications systems through the city of Lancaster, offered by Mr. Schoonover, seconded by Mrs. Downhour.
Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of temporary ordinance 121.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary ordinance 1-21. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover. Not at this time. Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. Schoonover?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 121.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 1-21. Mr. Schoonover?
This is just this is the companion ordinance to temporary resolution 1421 that we passed earlier, granting these easements to Zayo for their underground wire project.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 1-21 passes 8-0. Temporary ordinance 2-21.
An ordinance to amend ordinance 31-20, repeal and replace existing 31-20, and declare an emergency for the non-union pay ordinance, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
First of two readings, please.
First of two readings on temporary ordinance 2-21. Are there any further ordinances to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we have no tabled legislation to act upon tonight. Is there any unfinished business?
Mr. President,
Mr. Hall?
yes, just very quickly, at our last meeting, you indicated that you had been approached by someone in the business community about their concerns regarding the fees that restaurants are now required to pay for the delivery of food in our community. At your request, we convened the law committee and looked into the issue. And there was tremendous sympathy around the table for the concerns, but we determined that there was no practical way to enact any legislation that could be enforced. So we must regrettably recommend to City Council that there is no action that we can take that would make a meaningful difference for those restaurants that are experiencing financial difficulty around the food delivery costs that they're now required to pay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hall, for that update, and thank you to you and to the law committee for so quickly convening after the first of the year to try to work through that issue. I think upon further research by the law director's office, that was found that even Columbus, who passed this legislation, and we were potentially attempting to sort of use as a template, that they have no enforcement mechanism either, and have found that out along this journey. And so it is unfortunate. We certainly, as you said, have sympathy for our businesses, downtown businesses, and otherwise that are utilizing that service. But at this time, unless something changes, it appears like there's little, if anything, we can do to provide some relief or assistance. So thank you for that update and for your work and for the law committee's work on that. Further unfinished business this evening. I'll provide just a quick update then, because I know we're 25 minutes here from kickoff. So the salary review work team, which is what we're calling this group, is coming together. I have 3 people in addition to our HR coordinator, Ms. Nyhouse. I can't say her last name.
You said
Yeah,
it.
that's it right there. Thank you very much. And Ms. Bobbitt, who's joining us along with myself. We have Kate Isles, who's an HR professional with Fairfield Homes. We have Abby Watson, who's an HR professional with Job and Family Services. And we have Maureen Ogilvie, who is an HR professional with Lancaster Bingo, who have all agreed to join this committee. And so we have both the public and private sectors represented, but we're a little low on gentlemen. And so there are not a ton that I have found HR fellows in the community. And so if anyone out there has interest, I have one person who is an attorney and not an HR professional, but has some interest in potentially serving on this committee, who is a male. And I'd like one more male to serve, preferably from the HR world, but if not, we are going to have to move forward with this business at some point and can't wait forever for that person to come forward. So if you have a recommendation, we'd be happy to consider that. At this time, that is the committee. I expect we will be meeting, and I'll have an even further update, perhaps even with some work that we've started at our next meeting. Thoughts or questions on that topic or on the topic that Mr. Hall has covered thus far? If not, is there other unfinished business this evening? Hearing none, is there any new business this evening? Mr. Hall?
Yeah, and if anybody wants to go, well, a couple of things, and I want to light touch this if I can. I got a call from a pretty active citizen in our community yesterday that voiced concerns that there are vague threats in the environment that could potentially, although I think the risk is remote, lead to some violence around future protests. And this person specifically mentioned the potential for violence against our mayor. I don't know if there's anything that we can do in terms of managing the environment if we do have future protests. But I think that it would be a worthy issue for us to do some additional potential exploratory work. We live in intemperate times. We've seen evidence of significant violence both in DC and in our state capital, and there was certainly the potential for violence in Lancaster during the extended period of protests that we experienced in the spring through the summer. So again, I'm not sure what we can do, but I don't think that it's prudent or wise for us to have citizens call and us not do our diligence around looking into those types of issues.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Appreciate that. Further new business this evening? Yes, Mr. McDaniel.
I just wanted to kind of address Mr. Hall's comments. We have a police department specifically designated by the Ohio Revised Code to deal with those types of things. And I'm confident that the mayor, Chief Pilar, the law director, are aware of these things, and that there are or have been discussions, and I'm sure they continue, especially when it comes to politically charged gatherings that might take place like we had in the summer. I believe the city handled those as well as could be expected. I think when threats are made against government officials, there are avenues they can take already that exist, and one is contacting law enforcement, having it investigated. If they can find that the threat's an actual threat, they can go to the law director and look at potential charges against the person who levied the threats.
I would not phrase this as a direct threat that was made, just a concern by a citizen around some comments that.
Certainly. Good to be aware of it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Further new business this evening on this or any other topic? No? Okay. We will then ask that the clerk read our upcoming scheduled meetings.
Upcoming regular meetings of council, January 25th, the meeting following February 8th, both here at 6:30 PM in council chambers. Upcoming committee meetings for the next 30 days, water pollution control, January 13th at 8 AM in the City Hall 1897 room. Economic development, January 21st at 7:30 AM in the City Hall 1897 conference room. Finance, January 25th here at 6 PM in council chambers. Service committee, February 5th at 7:30 AM at the City Hall 1897 conference room. Finance, February 8th at 6 PM here in council chambers. And finally, water pollution control, February 10th at 8 AM at the City Hall 1897 conference room.
Very good. And do you have all committees scheduled yet? You don't have to reference specifically, but.
I have all of them.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you for getting those dates into the clerk so we can get those posted. Are there any bills this evening?
There is one, PNC, payable to PNC for a publication of legal legislation. I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. for publication of legislation in MNCO for $176.35.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to pay the bill.
Second?
A motion and a second to pay the bill. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I know of no need for an executive session this evening. If not, we'll move to a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second that.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you all very much. A lot of work tonight.
Mayor.
I appreciate each one of you. Go Bucks. Our
Mayor,
meeting is
Mayor,
adjourned.
Sign your legislation.
Mayor.
Thank you.